A dog refused to give birth. When the vet checked her belly, he screamed, "Call 911 immediately!" At first, it looked like a normal delivery gone wrong, but what they found inside was nothing anyone could have imagined. A loyal pet fighting for her life, a desperate owner begging for answers, and a vet who risks everything when he realizes the truth. But behind this shocking discovery lies a dangerous secret, one powerful men will do anything to hide. When the storm closes in and the lights go out, lives hang in the balance. What was really inside the dog's belly? And how far will they go to stop the truth from getting out? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The winter storm howled through Redford like an angry beast, whipping snow and ice against the windows of Boone Veterinary Clinic. The wind rattled the glass panes as Rhea Kincaid burst through the front door, her German Shepherd Vesper cradled awkwardly in her arms. Snow clung to Rhea's auburn hair and melted on her shoulders as she stumbled inside, her green eyes wild with worry. "Dr. Boone!" she called out, her voice cracking. "Something's wrong with Vesper. She won't—" Dr. Calder Boone emerged from the back room, his weathered face immediately shifting into professional focus. His dark hair, streaked with early grey, caught the fluorescent lights as he quickly crossed the waiting room. One look at Vesper's distressed state had him motioning toward the exam room. "Bring her in here," he commanded, his tone steady but urgent. "Juniper, we need oxygen." Juniper Caro, his trusted veterinary technician, was already moving. Her short dark hair bobbed as she rushed to gather supplies, her glasses slipping down her nose. She worked with practiced efficiency, setting up the oxygen while Dr. Boone helped Rhea place Vesper on the examination table. "Tell me what happened," Boone said, his hands already moving over Vesper's distended abdomen. The German Shepherd whimpered, her normally alert eyes dulled with pain. Rhea wrapped her arms around herself, shivering from more than just the cold. She had a breeding appointment at Pine Hollow Kennels 3 weeks ago. Everything seemed fine, but this morning she started acting strange, refusing food, pacing. I thought maybe it was time, but something feels wrong. "She's in pain, Dr. Boone." Boone's expression darkened at the mention of Pine Hollow Kennels, but he kept his focus on Vesper. "Juniper, get the ultrasound ready. We need to check on those pups." While Juniper prepared the machine, Boone continued his examination, his broad shoulders tense with concentration. He palpated Vesper's abdomen carefully, his frown deepening with each touch. Something about the way the tissue felt beneath his fingers wasn't right. The resistance was wrong, too firm, too uniform. "How far along did they say she was?" he asked, reaching for the ultrasound probe as Juniper brought the machine over. "About 3 weeks," Rhea replied, moving closer to stroke Vesper's head. "They said the breeding was successful, but—" She fell silent as Boone applied gel to Vesper's belly and pressed the probe against her skin. The room filled with the soft, whooshing sound of the ultrasound, but as the image appeared on the screen, Boone's practiced calm began to crack. There were no puppies. Instead, the screen showed strange, uniform shapes, hard-edged and completely foreign to what should have been there. Dark fluid shifted ominously around these objects, and Boone's jaw clenched as he moved the probe, confirming what he was seeing. "Dear God," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. Rhea leaned forward, her face pale. "What is it? What's wrong with her?" Boone didn't answer immediately. He handed the probe to Juniper and stripped off his gloves with sharp, angry movements. When he finally looked up, his eyes met Juniper's, and a silent understanding passed between them. "Call 911!" he ordered, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Now!" "911?" Rhea's voice rose with panic. "I don't understand. What's happening to my dog?" Boone turned to her, his expression grave. "Rhea, Vesper isn't pregnant. She's been surgically implanted with something. Those aren't puppies we're seeing on the ultrasound. Someone has used her as a carrier." The color drained from Rhea's face as the implication hit her. Her knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the exam table for support. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Walt Dermott, he did this to punish me. Because I refused to—" She couldn't finish, but Boone understood. He'd heard rumors about Pine Hollow Kennels and its owner, Walt Dermott, but this was beyond anything he'd imagined. In the background, Juniper's voice was steady as she spoke to emergency services, giving them the clinic's address and explaining the situation in careful, professional terms. "We need to operate immediately," Boone said, already moving to prep for surgery. "Whatever they've put inside her is causing inflammation and fluid buildup. If we wait, she'll die." "But the storm," Rhea protested weakly, looking toward the windows where the snow was now coming down in thick white sheets. "We don't have a choice." Boone's voice was firm as he began gathering surgical supplies. "Juniper, start her on IV fluids and prepare for emergency surgery. Full protocol." Juniper nodded, her movements quick and precise as she gathered instruments and medications. The sound of distant sirens began to penetrate the howling wind, growing louder as they approached through the whiteout conditions. "What about the police?" Rhea asked, her hand still stroking Vesper's fur. The German shepherd's breathing had become more labored, despite the oxygen support. "They'll be here soon," Boone assured her, already scrubbing his hands and arms at the surgical sink. "But right now, saving Vesper is our priority. Whatever evidence we find, we'll document everything. Juniper will assist me and keep detailed records." Juniper was already setting up the surgical table, her face set with determination. "Everything will be photographed and logged, Dr. Boone. They won't get away with this." The sirens were very close now, their wailing competing with the storm's fury. Blue and red lights began to flash through the windows, casting eerie shadows across the clinic's walls. Boone finished scrubbing and turned to Rhea, his eyes soft despite the tension in his face. "I need your permission to operate. The risk is significant. She's already showing signs of sepsis, and the surgery will be complicated. But if we don't do this now, we'll lose her." Rhea straightened her spine, her green eyes filling with tears but also determination. "Do whatever you have to do. Save her, Dr. Boone, please." He nodded once, then began to gown up as Juniper helped him with his sterile gloves. The front door of the clinic burst open, bringing with it a blast of cold air and 2 police officers, their uniforms dusted with snow. "In here," Juniper called out, even as she continued preparing for surgery. "Dr. Boone will need to operate immediately, but we'll preserve everything we find." The officers entered the exam room, taking in the scene with professional assessment. One began asking Rhea questions while the other spoke quietly into his radio, requesting additional units and investigators. Vesper whimpered again, and Boone moved to her side, fully gowned and gloved. "It's time," he said quietly. "Juniper, begin anesthesia induction. Rhea, you'll need to step out now." As Juniper administered the medications that would put Vesper under, Boone looked down at his patient, his jaw set with grim determination. In all his years of veterinary practice, he'd seen animals affected by human cruelty, but this was different. This was calculated, deliberate evil, and he was damned if he was going to let it claim another victim. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the clinic, a different kind of storm was brewing, one that would expose the darkness lurking behind Pine Hollow Kennel's respectable facade and bring justice for more than just one German shepherd. But first they had to save Vesper's life, and as Boone picked up his scalpel, he silently vowed that failure was not an option. The sound of the heart monitor filled the room with its steady beeping as Juniper announced, "Patient is under, Dr. Boone. We're ready to begin." With steady hands and unwavering focus, Boone made the first incision, knowing that what they were about to discover would change everything, not just for Vesper and Rhea, but for the entire town of Redford. The emergency routine snapped into place with the precision of countless drills. Juniper moved with swift efficiency, her hands steady as she prepared the anesthesia, while Boone created a sterile field around Vesper's still form. The familiar dance of preparation helped calm his racing thoughts, even as worry gnawed at the edges of his focus. "Blood pressure still dropping," Juniper reported, her voice tight but controlled. "We need to move quickly." Boone nodded, arranging surgical instruments in their precise order: clamps, retractors, forceps, each tool gleaming under the harsh operating lights. He'd done this thousands of times, but never quite like this, never with such stakes. Rhea stood nearby, her face pale as paper as she stared at the consent form. Her hand trembled so badly she could barely hold the pen. "If anything happens to her," she whispered, "we're going to do everything we can," Boone assured her, his voice gentle but firm. "But we need to start now." The pen scratched across paper as Rhea signed, each letter drawn with painful deliberation. Just as Boone reached for his scalpel, the clinic's front door burst open with a bang that made everyone jump. Walt Dermot's bulk filled the doorway, his expensive coat dusted with snow. Behind him loomed Deputy Strake, trying to look official despite his rumpled uniform. Dermot's face was flushed with what appeared to be concern, but Boone caught the calculating gleam in his eyes. "Now hold on just a minute," Dermot boomed, striding forward. "That animal is evidence in an ongoing investigation. You can't just cut into her." Boone didn't look up from his preparations. "This animal is my patient, and she'll die without immediate surgery." "Dr. Boone." Deputy Strake stepped forward, hand resting meaningfully on his belt. "You need to step away from that dog. Mr. Dermot has raised some serious concerns about." "About what, exactly?" Boone's voice cut through the room like ice. "About what might be found inside her. Because I can tell you right now, it's not puppies." Dermot's face darkened. "You're interfering with a police matter. Deputy?" Strake cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but pressing on. "Dr. Boone, if you proceed with this surgery, you'll be facing charges for tampering with evidence and obstruction of justice. And if I don't proceed, I'll be facing charges of criminal negligence and violation of veterinary ethics." Boone's hands remained steady as he checked Vesper's vitals again. "Emergency doctrine gives me the right and obligation to save this animal's life. You can arrest me afterward if you want, but right now, I'm doing my job." "This is ridiculous," Dermot sputtered. "Strake, stop him." The deputy shifted his weight, uncertain. "Dr. Boone, I'm warning you." Thunder cracked overhead with deafening force, and the lights went out. For one heart-stopping moment, the room plunged into total darkness. Then the emergency generator kicked in with a cough and sputter, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow before faltering again. "Juniper, headlamps!" Boone called out, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Start manual ventilation. Rhea, stay where you are and hold the rail. We need you to keep still." Juniper's hands were already moving, pulling out battery-powered headlamps and securing one to Boone's forehead, then her own. The small beams cut through the dimness, creating pools of light on Vesper's prepped surgical site. "This is your last warning," Strake called out, but his voice wavered. Boone took a deep breath, centered himself, and made the first incision. The scalpel parted flesh with precise grace, and blood welled up dark against the pale fur. Outside, new sirens joined the storm's howling, police, ambulance, fire trucks, all converging on the clinic. Rhea's knuckles were white on the table rail as she watched, forced to bear witness from her corner. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps that matched the rhythm of Boone's steady inhales and exhales. "Beginning blunt dissection," Boone murmured. "Juniper, count." 120/80. Juniper responded, her voice falling into the familiar cadence of surgical monitoring. Pulse 92, respiration 18 inches. The small room seemed to contract around them, the world beyond the circle of headlamp light fading away. Dermot's blustering and Strake's threats became distant background noise, less relevant than the soft beep of monitoring equipment and the whisper of surgical gauze. Time narrowed to heartbeats, to the space between breaths. Each movement of Boone's hands carried the weight of life and death, while the storm raged outside and sirens drew ever closer. In the corner, Rhea's prayers mingled with Juniper's steady count, a desperate harmony against the thunder's bass note. "Pulse dropping to 85. Juniper called out. "Blood pressure holding." Boone worked with methodical precision, each motion calculated and sure despite the less-than-ideal lighting. The generator sputtered again, but held this time, casting weird shadows across the walls. Deputy Strake had fallen silent, perhaps finally understanding the gravity of the situation, while Dermot's face had taken on an almost greenish tinge in the emergency lights. "I'm entering the abdominal cavity," Boone announced, his voice carrying the same professional calm it always did, though inside his heart was racing. "Juniper, suction ready." The storm unleashed another thunderous volley, but inside the surgery room, the only sounds that mattered were Vesper's monitored heartbeat and Juniper's ongoing count, marking time in the space between life and death. Under the harsh glare of the headlamps, Boone's skilled hands moved with practiced precision through layers of muscle and tissue. The generator's unsteady hum filled the tense silence, occasionally threatening to plunge them back into darkness. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he navigated deeper, following the abnormal masses he'd seen on the ultrasound. "Pulse steady at 82, Juniper called out, her voice anchoring him in the familiar routine despite the extraordinary circumstances. Suddenly, his fingers encountered something foreign, smooth, artificial, definitely not biological. As he carefully worked to free it from the surrounding tissue, there was a soft pop, and a sharp, chemical smell filled the air. "Ruptured packet!" Boone's voice cracked through the room like a whip. "Juniper, clamps and irrigation, now!" The acrid scent burned his nostrils as panic threatened to rise. They had no way of knowing what substance was now leaking into Vesper's system. Juniper's hands were already moving, clamping off the affected area while reaching for the irrigation solution. "Blood pressure dropping," she reported tersely. 70/50 and falling. Boone switched to manual ventilation, keeping Vesper's airways clear while her body fought against the foreign substance. His arms ached from the effort, but he couldn't stop. The clinic had become a battlefield, and Vesper's life hung in the balance. "Come on, girl," he muttered, working steadily despite the failing light and contaminated field. "Stay with us." The generator coughed again, lights flickering ominously. Rhea made a small, frightened sound from her corner, but Boone couldn't spare the attention to reassure her. Every ounce of his concentration was focused on the task at hand. "More packets," he announced, carefully extracting another sealed bundle. "Juniper, we need to document this. Get the camera ready and start a chain of custody record." "But sir, we don't have proper evidence bags," Juniper protested, even as she reached for the clinic's digital camera. "Improvise," Boone ordered. "Sterile specimen containers, photograph everything. Time, date, witnesses." He glanced meaningfully at Deputy Strake, who had gone pale and quiet against the wall. One by one, Boone removed the packets. Far too many to be coincidence. Each was carefully photographed in situ, then placed in a labeled container. Juniper's steady hands documented everything, her voice clear as she recorded details into the clinic's digital recorder. "Packet number 7, extracted at 11:47 p.m., approximately 2 inches by 3 inches, sealed polymer material." The generator finally settled into a steady rhythm, the lights stabilizing as Boone removed the last packet. The worst seemed to have passed. Vesper's vitals were holding steady, the contaminated area had been thoroughly irrigated, and the evidence was secured. Heavy boots sounded in the waiting room, and a new voice cut through the tension. "State Police, Trooper Whitcomb." The atmosphere shifted immediately. Deputy Strake straightened up, his previous bluster evaporating as the tall state trooper entered the surgery room. Hal Whitcomb's calm, authoritative presence seemed to fill the space, making Strake's earlier threats seem petty and hollow. "Dr. Boone." Whitcomb nodded professionally. "I understand you have a situation here." "Just closing now, Trooper," Boone replied, his hands steady as he placed the final sutures. "Patient is stable. We've recovered multiple foreign objects that were surgically implanted in this animal." Dermot, who had been unnaturally quiet during the surgery, suddenly spoke up. This is ridiculous. Those could be anything. Medical implants, tracking devices. That rupture when disturbed and leak unknown chemicals? Boone interrupted, not looking up from his work. I think we all know what these really are, Mr. Dermot. Rhea finally collapsed into a nearby chair, the tension of the last hour catching up with her. Her face was tear-streaked, but grateful as she watched Vesper's steady breathing. Will she be okay? Boone stepped back from the table, peeling off his gloves. She should make a full recovery. Her body was fighting hard against these foreign objects. That's why she wouldn't whelp. Her system was already under too much stress. I'll need a full statement, Whitcomb said, pulling out a notepad. His eyes swept over the documented evidence, then settled on Dermot with quiet intensity. And I'd like to hear more about operations at Pine Hollow Kennels. Dermot's face had gone cold and hard, his earlier pretense of concern completely abandoned. He backed toward the door, eyes calculating. My lawyer will be in touch. This isn't over. Without another word, he turned and strode out, leaving Deputy Strake shifting uncomfortably in his wake. The night storm still raged outside, but inside the clinic, a different kind of storm had just begun to break. Boone watched Whitcomb begin his preliminary investigation, knowing they had only scratched the surface of whatever was happening at Pine Hollow. But for now, Vesper was safe. The evidence was secured, and the truth was finally starting to emerge. Juniper continued documenting the recovered packets, while Boone checked Vesper's vitals one more time. The German shepherd's strong heartbeat was the best sound he'd heard all night, proof that sometimes, even in the darkest moments, skill and determination could win out against corruption and cruelty. In the quiet aftermath of surgery, with Vesper resting safely under warm blankets, Trooper Whitcomb gathered everyone in Boone's small office. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside, a different kind of darkness was being brought to light. This isn't the first time I've seen this, Whitcomb said, his weathered face grave in the office's dim light. We've tracked similar cases across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Show dogs used as drug mules, carrying synthetic opioids across state lines. Boone leaned against his desk, arms crossed. How do they get away with it? Money talks, Whitcomb replied, his voice heavy with disgust. Kennel permits get greased through the system. Health inspections mysteriously pass without issue. Records conveniently disappear when questions start getting asked. He pulled out a thick folder from his briefcase. Pine Hollow sits right at the center of it all. Dermot's donations to certain officials have brought a lot of silence over the years. Rhea, who had been quietly stroking Vesper's head through the recovery cage bars, spoke up. I worked there for 2 years. Things never felt right, but whenever I asked questions. She swallowed hard. Let's just say Dermot has ways of making people stay quiet. Tell me about Vesper's disappearance, Whitcomb said, pulling out his notebook. Rhea's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. It was 36 hours ago. Dermot insisted on taking her for what he called a special breeding appointment. When I objected, he reminded me of my contract, how he could ruin my reputation in the show circuit if I didn't cooperate. Her voice grew stronger with anger. When they brought her back, she was different. Sluggish. That's when she started refusing to eat, and then the pain started. Whitcomb took detailed notes, his pen scratching steadily across the paper. And your employment at Pine Hollow, when exactly did you leave? 8 months ago, Rhea said. After I refused to falsify some pedigree paperwork, Dermot made sure no other major kennel would hire me after that. Boone had been growing increasingly tense as he listened, his jaw clenched, and his normally calm demeanor hardened into something more resolute. What do we need to do next? He asked Whitcomb. The trooper looked up from his notes. First, we need to secure everything from tonight. All medical waste, every scrap of gauze or tissue that might have been contaminated by those packets. We need the footage from your surgical headcams. You do record your procedures, correct? Juniper, who had been quietly organizing evidence bags, nodded. Yes, it's standard practice here. I've already started copying the files. Good, Whitcomb said. We'll need affidavits from everyone present tonight. Detailed accounts of everything you saw, heard, or did. The more documentation we have, the harder it will be for Dermot's lawyers to poke holes in our case. Despite having been awake for nearly 24 hours, Juniper moved with tireless efficiency. She had arranged the photographic evidence in chronological order, each image clearly labeled with time stamps and witnesses. The recovered packets were secured in a locked cabinet, their chain of custody meticulously recorded. I've organized everything by category, she explained, showing Whitcomb her system. Surgical photos, evidence photos, sample containers, and all corresponding documentation. Everything's cross-referenced. The storm outside was beginning to lose some of its fury as the first hints of dawn threatened behind the clouds. Whitcomb spread out a map on Boone's desk, pointing to Pine Hollow's location. I'm drafting a warrant request for Pine Hollow's records and kennels, he said. We'll need to move fast before Dermot has a chance to clean house. Dr. Boone, I could use your expertise during the search. Strictly as a veterinary consultant, of course. Everything by the book. Boone nodded grimly. I'll help however I can, within legal bounds. If there are other dogs being used like this. I'm going too, Rhea interrupted, her voice firm. Her eyes flickered to Vesper's sleeping form. After what they did to her, I need to be there. I know that facility inside and out. I know where Dermot keeps his real records. It could be dangerous, Whitcomb warned. Dermot won't take this lying down. I don't care, Rhea said. Vesper suffered through this because of me. Because I wouldn't play along with his schemes. I won't hide anymore. The office fell quiet, except for the steady beeping of Vesper's monitoring equipment and the gradually weakening wind outside. Through the window, the sky was beginning to shift from pitch black to a deep gray. Dawn was coming, and with it, the chance to finally expose what had been happening at Pine Hollow. Juniper finished labeling another set of evidence bags. I'll stay with Vesper, she offered. She'll need monitoring for the next 24 hours anyway. Boone looked around at this unlikely team that had come together in his small clinic. A state trooper who hadn't given up on justice, a vet tech whose attention to detail might help make their case stick, a former kennel worker brave enough to stand up to her old boss, and himself, a small-town vet who couldn't look away from wrongdoing, no matter the cost. Whitcomb began outlining the warrant specifics, his voice steady and determined. They would hit Pine Hollow as soon as the warrant came through, likely within hours. Years of corruption and cruelty were about to be dragged into the light of day, all because one dog's suffering had brought the right people together at the right moment. Outside, the storm clouds were finally beginning to break. A new day was coming, and with it, the chance to right some long-standing wrongs. In her recovery cage, Vesper slept peacefully, unaware that her ordeal had set in motion events that would affect dogs and people across 3 states. The small team worked on through those pre-dawn hours, preparing for whatever the coming day might bring. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in pale streaks as 3 vehicles pulled up to Pine Hollow Kennels. Trooper Whitcomb's cruiser led the small convoy, followed by Boone's truck and an animal control van. The morning air was crisp and still, holding none of the previous night's storm fury. Whitcomb stepped out first, warrant in hand, his face set in professional neutrality. Dr. Boone, you and Miss Carrow stay close. Remember, you're here as expert consultants only. Boone nodded, medical kit at the ready. Beside him, Juniper clutched her tablet and camera, ready to document everything they found. Rhea hung back slightly, her shoulders tense as she looked at the familiar buildings. The kennel office door opened before they reached it. Walt Dermot emerged, wearing an expensive sweater and an artificial smile. Trooper Whitcomb, what brings you out so early? If you'd called ahead. This is a warranted search, Mr. Dermot. Whitcomb cut in, extending the document. Please step aside. Dermot's smile didn't waver as he scanned the warrant, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Of course. Though I must say, this seems rather excessive. We run a completely legitimate operation here. The team moved past him into the main building. The first thing that hit them was the smell. antiseptic and bleach overlaying something more medicinal. Juniper started taking photos immediately, while Boone's trained eye swept the reception area. "This way," Rhea whispered, pointing toward a hallway. "The special breeding area is through there." They found the first dogs in what was labeled as the recovery ward. The animals lay listlessly in their cages, many appearing sedated and underweight. Boone's jaw tightened as he conducted quick assessments. "These dogs need immediate medical attention," he declared, checking vital signs on a particularly thin German shepherd. "Severe dehydration, possible malnutrition, and these puncture marks." He pointed to barely healed incisions. Juniper photographed everything, her tablet filling with detailed notes. Multiple dogs showing signs of recent abdominal surgery, suspicious healing patterns, inadequate post-operative care. Dermot hovered nearby, maintaining his benevolent breeder facade. "We had several planned C-sections this week, all properly documented, I assure you." "We'll need those documents," Whitcomb stated firmly, "along with all surgical records, intake logs, and supply inventories." In a back room that reeked of disinfectant, they found what looked like a makeshift surgical suite. Boone methodically examined and documented the equipment, while Juniper tagged evidence. Surgical staplers, suture lots, medication vials. "Note these staple brands," Boone murmured to Juniper. "Compare them to what we removed from Vesper." They worked quickly but thoroughly, loading the most distressed animals into the animal control van for immediate treatment. Each piece of evidence was carefully logged and photographed. Fragments of ledgers showing suspicious gaps, intake records with inconsistent dates, post-surgical supplies that didn't match the number of declared procedures. Rhea moved through the familiar spaces like a ghost, her face pale but determined. She paused in one room, touching a metal table. "This is where they brought Vesper," she said quietly. "I recognize the setup in your surgical photos." The sound of tires on gravel announced a new arrival. Deputy Strake emerged from his patrol car, taking his time walking to the building. His late arrival and unhurried pace spoke volumes. "Might want to slow down there, Trooper," Strake drawled, examining his fingernails. "Hearing some concerns about procedural issues with this warrant. Wouldn't want all this effort to go to waste because of technical problems." Whitcomb's face remained impassive, but his voice carried steel. "The warrant is solid, Deputy. If you have specific concerns, you can raise them through proper channels." While they spoke, Boone continued his methodical documentation, paying special attention to the details others might miss. Lot numbers on medication bottles, dates scribbled in margins, initials on surgical charts. Each piece might seem small alone, but together they could tell a story that would be harder to dismiss. "Dr. Boone," Juniper called softly, holding up a surgical log. "These dates match the timeline Rhea gave us for Vesper's disappearance." Dermot's carefully maintained smile slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and angry beneath. "You're making a serious mistake here," he said, his voice carrying just enough threat to make Rhea flinch. "My lawyers will have a field day with this harassment." "Your lawyers are welcome to review everything," Whitcomb replied evenly. "We're doing this by the book." They loaded the last crate into the animal control van as the morning sun climbed higher. Rhea stood in the doorway of a room she'd once worked in, her hands clenched into fists. The familiar surroundings brought back memories she'd tried to forget, but she forced herself to stay steady. Her testimony could help make sure no other dogs suffered like Vesper. The evidence they'd gathered wasn't overwhelming, no smoking gun that would single-handedly bring down Pine Hollow, but it was a start. They had documentation of suspicious surgeries, inconsistent records, and most importantly, animals in desperate need of care. It was enough to build on, enough to keep digging. As they prepared to leave, Boone caught Whitcomb's eye and nodded slightly. They both knew this was just the beginning. Dermot's operation wouldn't fall easily, but they'd gained their first real foothold. They drove away from Pine Hollow with evidence boxes, rescued animals, and a growing list of questions that demanded answers. Deputy Strake watched them leave, his face unreadable. Dermot stood in the doorway of his kennel, the mask of benevolence completely gone now, his eyes burning with barely contained rage as he watched his carefully constructed world begin to crack. The morning after the raid, Dr. Calder Boone arrived at his clinic to find an official notice taped to the front door. His heart sank as he read the county council's letterhead, detailing an inquiry into unauthorized emergency procedures and potential violations of veterinary licensing standards. Inside, Juniper was already on the phone, her face tight with concern. "They've sealed our controlled substances cabinet," she reported, covering the receiver. "Anonymous complaint triggered an immediate review. We can't access any of our emergency medications." Boone ran a hand through his graying hair, feeling the weight of Dermot's counterattack. Without access to those medications, they couldn't handle serious emergencies or perform essential surgeries. The timing wasn't coincidental. "How's Vesper doing?" he asked, heading to check on their recovering patient. "Stable, thank goodness. Rhea's been here since dawn." Juniper followed him to the recovery area. "But Dr. Boone, there's more. Deputy Strake claims one of the evidence boxes from Pine Hollow has gone missing, the one with the surgical logs and supply records." In the recovery area, Rhea sat beside Vesper's cage, her German shepherd's eyes tracking their movement. The dog's condition was improving, but the broader fight was clearly just beginning. "Dermot's not wasting any time," Boone said quietly. "He's using every connection he has." Trooper Whitcomb arrived an hour later, his expression grim. "I've heard rumors about Judge Marshall being in Dermot's pocket," he said, closing the office door. "Campaign contributions, family connections. It could explain how Pine Hollow's passed inspections for years, despite complaints." Boone felt the vice tightening around his practice and reputation. Everything he'd built over decades of honest work could be dismantled by a corrupt system. But looking at Vesper, remembering the other suffering animals they'd rescued, he knew backing down wasn't an option. Juniper burst in, clutching her tablet. "I have copies," she announced. "Before we turned over the evidence, I photographed everything. Every page, every log entry, every serial number. High-resolution images with timestamps." Whitcomb's face brightened slightly. "That could help. I've reached out to a contact at the federal level, someone who owes me a favor. If we can get this classified as part of an interstate investigation, it'll be harder for local pressure to bury it." Rhea had been quiet, but now she spoke up. "I've been making notes, too." She spread out several pages of handwritten observations. 3 years of breeding patterns at Pine Hollow, staff schedules, unusual shipment dates, dogs that disappeared and reappeared, times when certain areas were suddenly off-limits to regular staff. They gathered around the small break room table, laying out what remained of their case. The video footage from Boone's surgery showed clear evidence of the packets they'd removed from Vesper, their chain of custody documented despite the power outage. The rescued animals provided living proof of neglect and suspicious surgical intervention. "We need something they can't explain away," Boone said, studying the evidence. "Something that connects these surgeries directly to Pine Hollow's operation." Juniper pulled up photos on her tablet. "Look at these staple patterns from Vesper's surgery. And here, the same unusual double-row pattern in photos from Pine Hollow's surgical room. It's not standard practice, but it's consistent across multiple cases. The suture material, too," Boone added, leaning closer. "It's a specialized type, not commonly used in veterinary practice, but we found the same lot numbers at Pine Hollow that we removed from Vesper." Whitcomb nodded slowly. "Surgical signatures. Like a fingerprint, if we can establish a clear pattern." A commotion from the front desk interrupted them. Deputy Strake stood in the waiting room, holding another official-looking document. "Cease and desist order," he announced with poorly concealed satisfaction. "Pending review of your emergency care protocols." Boone accepted the paper, maintaining his composure despite the anger burning in his chest. As soon as Strake left, Whitcomb pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my federal contact now. This kind of coordinated harassment usually works because people get isolated. We're not letting that happen here." Through the window, they could see Dermot's expensive car cruise slowly past the clinic. He didn't stop, but the message was clear. He was watching, confident in his ability to crush any opposition through his web of influence. "He thinks he's untouchable," Rhea said, her voice hard. "That's why he's gotten away with this for so long. Nobody could fight back alone." "But we're not alone," Juniper pointed out, still scanning through her documented evidence. "And we have proof that can't just disappear." They worked through the afternoon, meticulously comparing surgical techniques, supply records, and timing patterns. Every connection had to be rock solid, supported by multiple pieces of evidence. They couldn't afford any weak links that could be explained away or dismissed on technicalities. Whitcomb received a text that made him smile slightly. "My contact's interested. Says this fits a pattern they've been tracking across state lines. They're willing to review our evidence." "How soon?" Boone asked. Knowing every day without access to his controlled substances, Cabinet put animals at risk. "They can have someone here by tomorrow, but we need to be absolutely certain about our surgical proof. It has to be something that would convince other veterinary professionals, stand up to expert scrutiny." Boone turned back to the surgical photos, decades of experience guiding his analysis. "These aren't just unusual techniques. They're specifically adapted for quick procedures with minimal recovery time. See how the tissue layers are handled? It's all about speed and concealment, not proper healing." Juniper enlarged several images on her tablet. "And look at the dates. Every time we have records of these specific surgical patterns, they align with Rhea's notes about unusual shipment activities." The pieces were coming together, forming a pattern that would be hard to dismiss as coincidence. But they knew Dermot wouldn't go down easily. His reach was long, his influence deep, and he'd already shown he was willing to use every tool at his disposal to protect his operation. As evening approached, Boone checked on Vesper one last time. The German shepherd's resilience inspired him. Despite everything she'd endured, she was fighting to recover, refusing to give up. They would do the same. "We'll keep working on this tonight," Juniper said, organizing their documentation. "By the time the federal investigator arrives tomorrow, we'll have every connection mapped out." Rhea stroked Vesper's head gently. "All those other dogs at Pine Hollow, they deserve a chance too. We can't let Dermot win this." Whitcomb gathered his notes, preparing to leave. "I'll keep the pressure on through official channels." The more he pushes back, the more obvious his obstruction becomes. Through the clinic windows, they could see storm clouds gathering again. But this time, they were better prepared, their evidence secure, their team united. Dermot's counterattack had been swift and harsh, but it had also revealed just how vulnerable he felt. Someone with nothing to hide wouldn't work so hard to bury the truth. "Get some rest," Boone told his team. "Tomorrow, we start pushing back." In the quiet of the clinic's back office, Juniper Caro hunched over her computer screen, her tired eyes fixed on the enlarged photos from Vesper's surgery. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across her desk. She'd been at it for hours, comparing images, looking for anything they might have missed. "Dr. Boone!" she called out suddenly, her voice tight with excitement. "You need to see this." Calder Boone appeared in the doorway, coffee cup in hand. He'd barely slept, the weight of recent events evident in the shadows under his eyes. "What have you found?" "Look at these." Juniper pulled up 2 images side by side. "The forensics lab found these tiny metal slivers embedded in the packets we removed from Vesper. At first, I thought they were just contamination, but..." She zoomed in closer. "They're trackers. Sophisticated ones, keyed to specific drop sites according to the lab report." Boone leaned in, setting his coffee aside. "That's how they monitor their shipments." Clever and dangerous. But that's not all. Juniper switched to another set of images. "Look at the staple pattern on Vesper's original incision line before our emergency surgery. See how distinctive it is? The spacing, the angle, it's like a signature." She quickly pulled up photos from their Pine Hollow seizure, clicking through them rapidly. The same exact pattern appears on multiple dogs from the kennel. Here, here, and here. It's too precise to be coincidence. Trooper Whitcomb, who had been reviewing documents in the corner, stood up and walked over. A surgical signature? That could be exactly what we need. Juniper nodded enthusiastically. I cross-referenced it with vet licensing records. Only one person uses this specific technique in the area, Crispin Vale. Dermot's son-in-law, Boone said quietly. The unlicensed surgeon. Rhea Kincaid, who had been sitting quietly with Vesper in the recovery area, approached the group. Her face had gone pale. Vale, I remember him. Always hanging around Pine Hollow, doing special procedures after hours. She swallowed hard, her hands trembling slightly. There's something else you need to know. Something I should have told you earlier. They all turned to look at her. Rhea took a deep breath, steadying herself. Before all this happened, Dermot tried to make me falsify pedigree papers. He wanted me to certify some obviously mixed-breed puppies as purebred. I refused. Her voice cracked slightly. 3 days later, Vesper was suddenly scheduled for breeding at Pine Hollow. I didn't want to send her, but Dermot made it clear what would happen if I didn't comply. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Boone's jaw tightened. This wasn't random at all. He targeted Vesper specifically to punish you and show others what happens when people don't fall in line. He's not just running drugs, Whitcomb said grimly. He's built an entire system of control through fear and family loyalty. The trafficking is just part of it. Juniper was already pulling up more photos. Look at these dates. Every time someone at Pine Hollow caused problems, their dogs would end up in Vale's surgery within a week. It's a pattern of intimidation. Boone started pacing, his mind racing. We need to make this undeniable. Vale's surgical signature is like handwriting, unique and identifiable. If we can get a sealed chain surgical review. I'll start drafting a broader warrant right now, Whitcomb said, pulling out his notebook. With the trackers and this surgical evidence, we can tie everything directly to Pine Hollow and Vale. The staple pattern is key, Boone explained, pointing to specific details in the photos. See how he doubles back on each closure. It's unnecessary and actually increases scarring, but it's consistent across every procedure. No properly trained vet would do it this way. Juniper was already organizing the evidence, creating side-by-side comparisons. I'll prepare a complete documentation package. Photos, dates, measurements, everything that shows this isn't just coincidence. Rhea moved closer to the screen, her face hard with determination. All those other dogs at Pine Hollow, how many of them were used to keep people quiet? How many families felt they had no choice? That's why we have to get this right, Boone said firmly. Vale's surgical signature is physical evidence that can't be explained away or buried in paperwork. It connects everything, the trafficking, the intimidation, the whole operation. Whitcomb looked up from his writing. I'm citing both the trackers and the surgical pattern in the warrant. We'll need expert testimony to verify the uniqueness of Vale's technique. I can help with that, Boone offered. I know several veterinary forensics experts who can confirm this isn't standard practice. The staple pattern alone would be enough to cost someone their license, if Vale had one to lose. Juniper continued building their case file, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The timing patterns are damning too. Every instance of Vale's signature coincides with what Rhea describes as problem periods at the kennel. He's been hiding behind his family connection, Whitcomb observed. Dermot's protection made him sloppy. He probably never thought anyone would look closely enough at his surgical technique to recognize it. Rhea moved back to Vesper's side, gently stroking the recovering dog's head. All this time, I thought I was alone in standing up to them. I should have known there were others. That's exactly what Dermot counted on, Boone said, his voice gentle but firm. Keeping everyone isolated, afraid to compare notes or ask questions, but that ends now. The morning light had strengthened, filling the office with a clear, steady glow. Outside, They could hear the normal sounds of the day beginning, cars passing, birds calling, life going on. But inside, everything had shifted. What had seemed like a simple case of trafficking had revealed itself as something far more insidious. Whitcomb finished his preliminary warrant draft and stood up. "I'll take this to the judge today. With the trackers and Vale's surgical signature, we can show clear intent and methodology. No more hiding behind coincidence or paperwork errors. We'll keep building the documentation," Juniper promised, already starting another comparison series. "By the time you get back, we'll have every instance of Vale's signature catalogued and cross-referenced." Boone looked at each member of their small team, seeing the same determination reflected in every face. They had found their smoking gun, or rather, their smoking staple gun. Now they just had to make sure the evidence was airtight. "Dermot thought he could control everyone through fear and family loyalty," Rhea said quietly, still beside Vesper. "He never counted on us working together." "That's his weakness," Boone agreed. "He's so used to dealing with isolated individuals that he doesn't know how to handle unified opposition." Juniper saved another set of comparison photos, adding them to their growing file. "The evidence speaks for itself now. Vale's surgical signature connects everything: the trafficking, the intimidation, the pattern of control. We just have to let the proof do its work." The morning light filtered through the clinic windows as Dr. Calder Boone prepared for what might be the most important documentation of his career. He had transformed the main examination room into a makeshift forensics lab, with bright surgical lights positioned strategically and 2 video cameras mounted on tripods. "Everything set up for recording?" Juniper Caro announced, adjusting the last camera. "Both cameras have fresh memory cards and backup batteries." Trooper Hal Whitcomb stood by the door, his presence lending official weight to the proceedings. "Remember, we need to maintain perfect chain of custody. Every step needs to be documented and witnessed." Boone nodded, pulling on fresh surgical gloves. "We'll start with Vesper's case as our baseline, then compare it to the dogs we rescued from Pine Hollow." He turned to Juniper. "Do you have the evidence markers ready?" "Yes, and I've prepared individual folders for each animal," she replied, gesturing to a neat stack of manila folders, each labeled with identification numbers and dates. "I'll photograph everything as we go." Rhea Kincaid sat in the corner with a legal pad, ready to record every observation and statement. Her face showed the strain of the past few days, but her hand was steady as she held her pen. "Starting documentation at 8:15 a.m. Boone spoke clearly for the cameras. "Present are myself, Dr. Calder Boone, Trooper Hal Whitcomb, Juniper Caro as evidence manager, and Rhea Kincaid as statement recorder." He began with Vesper's preoperative photos, pointing out the distinctive double-back staple pattern that had first caught their attention. "Note the unnecessary overlap in the closure technique," he explained, using a laser pointer to highlight specific areas. "This creates additional trauma and scarring, but it's consistent across all the cases we've found." Juniper carefully labeled each photo as evidence, creating a meticulous trail that would stand up to scrutiny. "Exhibit A1 through A7, she announced for the record, placing each in its designated folder. They moved methodically through the rescued dogs, examining each surgical site with the same careful attention. Boone's voice remained steady as he documented the matching patterns, but inside, his anger grew with each animal they examined. "The consistency is remarkable," Whitcomb observed, watching as Boone demonstrated the technique on a surgical model. "No variation in pattern or spacing across any of the cases." "That's what makes it so damning," Boone agreed. "It's like a signature." No properly trained veterinarian would use this technique, but Vale used it every single time. Rhea's pen scratched across her pad as she recorded each detail. Her voice was tight with emotion when she spoke. "I remember when some of these dogs came through Pine Hollow. The dates match exactly with when owners started having problems with Dermot." The morning stretched into afternoon as they built their case. Juniper organized the growing stack of evidence folders, creating a timeline that showed the progression of Vale's activities. "We've documented 17 cases with identical surgical patterns," she reported, "all within the past 8 months. When the last case was documented, Boone carefully removed his gloves. "This goes beyond coincidence," he said. "We've proven a clear pattern of unauthorized surgical procedures, all performed with the same distinctive technique." Whitcomb nodded, reviewing his notes. "I know a prosecutor 2 counties over who specializes in complex cases. She's had success with similar investigations where local influence was a concern." "Good," Boone said firmly. "The farther from Dermot's reach, the better." He turned to Juniper. "Make 3 complete copies of everything. We'll send the originals to the prosecutor and keep the copies secure in different locations." As Juniper began the copying process, Whitcomb pulled out a map. "While we're waiting, there's something else we need to discuss." He spread the map across an empty exam table. "Those trackers we found in the packets? They've given us a pattern of drop sites. One in particular looks promising, an abandoned grain elevator on the old county road." The team gathered around the map as Whitcomb pointed out the location. "It's isolated, minimal traffic, and the trackers show regular activity there. Could be perfect for a sting operation." Boone studied the map, feeling the weight of the decision. They were moving from defense to offense, from gathering evidence to active intervention. The risk was significant, but so was the potential reward. "We'll need to be careful," he said finally. "What's your proposed plan?" Whitcomb outlined his strategy, pointing out approach routes and containment positions. "We set up surveillance, wait for a drop, and move in when we can catch them with both product and paperwork. The key is getting the ledger. That's what will tie everything together." They spent the next hour planning, checking radio frequencies, mapping out emergency routes, preparing medical supplies in case things went wrong. Juniper packed go bags with basic trauma supplies, while Rhea drew detailed diagrams of the area based on her local knowledge. During a brief break, Rhea slipped away to visit Vesper in the recovery kennel. The German shepherd's tail thumped weakly against the blankets as Rhea knelt beside her. "We're close, girl," she whispered, gently stroking Vesper's head. "So close to making sure this never happens to another dog, or another family." Vesper leaned into her touch, brown eyes full of trust. Back in the main room, Boone sat at his desk, staring at the stack of evidence they'd compiled. Everything they'd worked for came down to this: the documented proof of Vale's surgical signature and the planned sting operation. If they succeeded, Dermot's network of protection would crumble. If they failed... But he knew they had no choice. Sometimes the only way forward was through. He reached for the phone to call the out-of-county prosecutor, ready to take the next step in bringing down Dermot's operation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the clinic floor as they finalized their preparations. Whitcomb checked his weapon and radio one last time before heading out to coordinate with his backup team. Juniper sealed the last evidence package, her usual energy tempered by the seriousness of their undertaking. Rhea returned from visiting Vesper, her face set with determination. She had spent too long being afraid of Dermot's influence. Now it was time to fight back. Boone looked at his team. Each member vital, each committed to seeing this through. They had moved beyond simply treating injured animals or gathering evidence. They were now actively working to dismantle a criminal operation that had hurt too many for too long. The abandoned grain elevator loomed against the darkening sky, its weathered silhouette a stark reminder of more prosperous times. Night crept across the landscape as Whitcomb's team moved in careful, practiced arcs around the perimeter, their footsteps silent on the packed earth. Dr. Calder Boone waited near the hastily assembled triage station, medical supplies arranged with military precision. His hands kept busy checking and rechecking equipment, but his mind remained razor-sharp, focused on what was to come. The familiar weight of his medical bag offered little comfort tonight. This was far beyond his usual veterinary duties. Juniper Caro sat in the communications van, headphones pressed tight against her ears, monitoring every crackle of radio traffic. Her fingers danced across a laptop keyboard, logging each team movement and timestamp with characteristic thoroughness. The glow of multiple screens cast blue shadows across her concentrated face. At her assigned position, Rhea Kincaid watched the access road through night vision binoculars. Every muscle in her body felt wound tight as a spring. After everything Dermot had done, to Vesper, to her, to countless others, this night felt like a reckoning long overdue. Movement at the south entrance? Whitcomb's voice whispered through their earpieces. 2 vehicles approaching. Stand by. Boone's pulse quickened as he watched dark shapes emerge from the vehicles. The couriers, right on schedule. They moved with the casual confidence of those who believed themselves unseen, carrying duffel bags toward the pre-arranged meeting point. The handoff began exactly as intelligence had suggested it would. Money changed hands. A leather-bound ledger appeared, its pages filled with damning evidence of transactions and shipments. For one crystalline moment, everything aligned perfectly. "Move in," Whitcomb commanded. His team emerged from the shadows like ghosts materializing. The arrests were textbook clean, swift, professional, precise. The couriers, caught completely off guard, offered no resistance as handcuffs clicked shut. The ledger was secured, sealed in an evidence bag. Boone allowed himself to breathe. It looked like victory. It felt like justice. Then came the roar of an engine at full throttle. Bright headlights burst through the darkness like an angry sunrise. Metal screamed as Dermot's truck smashed through the perimeter fencing, sending chunks of chain link flying. Sparks showered from the truck's undercarriage as it plowed across the concrete, a cascade of orange fire that found eager fuel in the dry chaff scattered across the floor. Fire bloomed in the elevator's base, hungry flames climbing the wooden supports with frightening speed. Smoke began to fill the space, thick and acrid. Through the chaos, Boone saw Deputy Strake emerge from the shadows, gun drawn and leveled at Whitcomb. The deputy's face was twisted with desperate calculation, a man seeing his protection crumbling, ready to cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. "Drop it, Whitcomb," Strake shouted, his voice cracking. "Slide that ledger over here, nice and slow." The crackle of flames grew louder. Then Boone heard it, whimpers coming from a stack of crates near the spreading fire. Dogs, sedated dogs, trapped and helpless as the flames advanced. In that moment, choice crystallized into action. Without hesitation, Boone sprinted toward the crates, ignoring shouts behind him. The heat was intense, smoke stinging his eyes as he reached the first crate. Inside, he could see multiple dogs, unconscious and vulnerable. He had just managed to get his hands on the crate when a terrible groaning sound filled the air. Above him, a massive wooden beam, weakened by the flames, gave way. The impact drove him to the ground, pinning him beneath its weight. Pain exploded across his back and legs. Oxygen grew thin as smoke filled his lungs. Trapped alone in the burning building, Boone felt darkness creeping at the edges of his vision. This, he thought distantly, was how it would end, trying to save lives, just as he'd always done. Then, cutting through the roar of flames and the ringing in his ears, came a sound that made his heart leap. A familiar bark. Sharp, insistent, determined. Vesper. Somehow she had slipped free of her protective cone, followed them here, found him in the smoke and chaos. Her bark rang out again, a beacon in the darkness. Guided by that sound, Rhea appeared through the smoke like an avenging angel. Without a word, she wedged a hydraulic jack under the beam's weight. The metal groaned as she pumped the handle, creating just enough space. Boone's hands were blistered and burning, but he forced them to move, to grip, to push. With a final surge of desperate strength, he shoved the crate of dogs clear of the flames. His lungs screamed for clean air, but the animals were safe. That was what mattered. "Come on!" Rhea grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. Vesper pressed against his other side, helping to steady him as they stumbled towards the exit. Behind them, the grain elevator continued to burn, illuminating the night sky with angry orange light. But they had won something here, something important. Despite Dermot's desperate attack, despite Strake's betrayal, despite the fire, they had secured the evidence they needed. More importantly, they had saved lives. Boone looked down at his blistered hands, then at Vesper's loyal face. then at Ria's determined expression. Sometimes victory came wrapped in pain and smoke, but it was victory nonetheless. Through the chaos, he could see Whitcomb leading a handcuffed Strake away, the ledger secure in an evidence bag. The deputy's resistance had crumbled in the face of real courage. The dogs from the crate were being treated at the triage station, safe under Juniper's capable care. The night wasn't over, but its darkest moment had passed, thanks to a brave dog who refused to stay behind and the people who refused to give up. Vesper pressed closer to his side, her presence a reminder of why they had taken this risk in the first place. Some things were worth fighting for, worth burning for, worth saving at any cost. In the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station interview room, Deputy Strake sat slumped at the metal table, his uniform wrinkled and his face drawn. The events at the grain elevator had broken something in him. His carefully maintained facade of authority had crumbled into desperate self-preservation. "I'll tell you everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darted between Trooper Whitcomb and the recording device on the table. "About Dermot, about Crispin Vale, all of it." Whitcomb kept his expression neutral, though satisfaction flickered in his eyes. "Start from the beginning." Over the next 2 hours, Strake laid out the entire operation. He named Dermot as the mastermind and Crispin Vale as the surgeon who performed the illegal implantations. His testimony matched perfectly with the ledger they'd seized, filling in the gaps with insider knowledge of payoffs, schedules, and drop points. Meanwhile, at Boone's clinic, Juniper and Boone worked methodically through the evidence from the seized animals. Under bright surgical lights, they photographed and documented every staple pattern, every suture technique. "Look at this," Juniper said, pointing to a distinctive double-cross pattern in the staples. "It's identical to what we found in Vesper." She overlaid the photos on her tablet, the patterns matching perfectly. "Crispin Vale's signature, clear as day." Boone nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. "No licensed vet would ever use this technique. It's unique to Vale, and it's on every single animal we rescued from Pine Hollow." They worked through the night, building an irrefutable case. By morning, they had compiled a comprehensive report showing the same surgical fingerprint across all the victims. Combined with Strake's confession and the detailed records in the ledger, it gave Whitcomb everything he needed. The warrants came through just after dawn. Multiple cruisers converged on Pine Hollow kennels, lights flashing in the early morning mist. Whitcomb led the team, warrant in hand, as they approached the main building. Dermot was waiting in his office, somehow managing to look both disheveled and arrogant. "This is harassment," he spat as Whitcomb entered. "My lawyers will—" "Walt Dermot," Whitcomb cut him off. "You're under arrest for trafficking controlled substances, conspiracy, animal cruelty, and operating an illegal surgical facility." He began reading the Miranda rights. That's when Dermot snapped. With surprising speed for his size, he lunged, not at Whitcomb, but at Rhea, who had come to witness justice being served. His face was contorted with rage as he reached for her throat. But he never made contact. A blur of fur and muscle slammed into him from the side, Vesper fully recovered and protecting her person. The German Shepherd's impact sent Dermot stumbling backward, giving Whitcomb the opening he needed. In seconds, the handcuffs clicked shut around Dermot's wrists. "Add assault to those charges," Whitcomb said coldly, as Vesper stood guard, hackles raised but disciplined. The dominoes fell quickly after that. Crispin Vale was arrested at his home. The State Veterinary Board revoked all associated licenses. Federal trafficking charges stacked up, promising long prison terms. Pine Hollow Kennels was shut down, its remaining animals rescued and rehabilitated. 2 weeks later, Boone's clinic reopened. The investigation had only strengthened his reputation, a vet who had risked everything to protect animals and expose corruption. The waiting room was full, a testament to the community's trust. Late one evening, after the last patient had left, Boone and Rhea sat in the quiet office. Vesper dozed at their feet, her surgical scar barely visible beneath her recovered coat. "I need to tell you something," Boone said quietly. Years ago, when I was a volunteer medic, I lost a patient. Young kid, car accident. I did everything right, followed every protocol, but sometimes that's not enough." He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "After that, I built walls. Figured if I kept everyone at arm's length, it wouldn't hurt so much when I failed." Rhea listened, her green eyes soft with understanding. "Dermot taught me not to trust," she admitted. "Every time I spoke up about the forged papers, the mistreated dogs, he found ways to punish me. Threatened my job, my reputation. When he took Vesper," her voice caught, "I started believing silence was safer." "We were both wrong," Boone said simply. "We were." Rhea agreed. She reached out, took his hand. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just two people choosing to trust again, to be brave in a quieter way. Vesper stirred, lifting her head to rest it on Boone's knee. Her intelligent eyes moved between them, as if approving this new pack formation. Outside, the spring evening was peaceful, so different from the winter storm that had started it all. They sat together in the gathering dusk, three survivors who had found their way to safety through trust and courage. The clinic around them wasn't just a place of healing anymore. It was a home they had fought for and won together. "Stay," Boone said softly, and they both knew he meant more than just for the evening. "I will," Rhea answered, and they both knew she meant forever. Between them, Vesper sighed contentedly, her body relaxed but alert, a guardian at peace but always watchful. The worst was behind them. The future, with all its possibilities stretched ahead. The quiet aftermath settled over Boone Veterinary Clinic like a heavy blanket. The last rays of afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the recovery kennels where the rescued dogs from Pine Hollow rested. Their soft breathing and occasional whimpers were the only sounds breaking the stillness. Dr. Calder Boone sat at his desk, wincing slightly as he adjusted the bandages covering his burned hands. The injuries from the grain elevator fire were healing, but slowly. Every time he changed the dressings, he remembered the crushing weight of that beam, the choking smoke, and Vesper's bark cutting through it all, the sound that had ultimately saved his life. Rhea Kincaid watched him from her chair across the office, concern etched on her features. Vesper lay beside her, the German shepherd's head resting on her paws, dark eyes alert despite her relaxed posture. The dog's surgical scar was barely visible now beneath her thick coat, but they all knew it was there, a permanent reminder of the night that had started everything. "You should let Juniper help with those bandages," Rhea said softly. "You're just making it harder on yourself." Boone managed a small smile. "Old habits. I'm used to taking care of others, not letting them take care of me." The phone rang, making them both jump. Rhea answered it, her face tensing until she recognized Trooper Whitcomb's voice. She put it on speaker. "The indictments just came through," Whitcomb announced, his steady voice carrying clear authority. "Walt Dermot and Crispin Vale are facing multiple federal charges: trafficking, conspiracy, animal cruelty, operating an illegal surgical facility, the works. With the evidence we have, especially that surgical signature pattern, they're looking at years, not months." Boone let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "And Strake?" "Turned state's evidence completely. His testimony about Dermot's operation and the cover-ups is damning. The prosecutor's confident." "Good," Rhea said firmly. Vesper's ears perked up at the edge in her voice. After they hung up, silence settled again. Boone studied his bandaged hands, remembering another piece of news from earlier that day. "The disciplinary board cleared me," he said quietly, "for Vesper's emergency surgery. They said—" He paused, still processing it. "They said my actions were not just justified but commendable. That by defying protocol that night, we saved more than just one life." Rhea moved her chair closer, careful not to disturb Vesper. "You did. You saved her when everyone else would have handed her over to Dermot. You risked everything." I couldn't do anything else, Boone admitted. Not after losing that boy years ago. Rhea waited, sensing there was more. She'd learned to read his silences. I was a volunteer medic, he continued, his voice rough with memory. Car accident, bad weather like the night you brought Vesper in. Young kid, maybe 16. I did everything right, every protocol, every procedure. It wasn't enough. He flexed his bandaged fingers. After that, I switched to veterinary medicine. Figured it would hurt less when I failed. Built walls, kept everyone at arm's length. Work became everything because it was safer than caring too much. Vesper rose and padded over to him, resting her head on his knee. The simple gesture of comfort seemed to break something loose in him. But then you brought Vesper in that night, he said, looking at Rhea. And suddenly following protocol wasn't enough. Staying detached wasn't an option. Rhea understood that kind of protective shell all too well. When I worked at Pine Hollow, she said, I saw things. Wrong things. The first time I spoke up about the forged pedigrees, Dermot called me into his office. He was so reasonable about it, said I must have misunderstood, offered me a raise to help clear up the confusion. She stroked Vesper's fur, drawing strength from the dog's solid presence. But I kept seeing more. Missing dogs, strange surgeries. When I wouldn't back down, the threats started. Subtle at first, hints about how hard it would be to find another job, comments about my reputation in the industry. Then they got worse. That's when he took Vesper, Boone said quietly. Rhea nodded. I learned to stay quiet. To look the other way. I convinced myself it was safer that way, that speaking up only got people hurt. Her voice hardened. I was wrong. We both were, Boone said. He reached out with his bandaged hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. For years, he continued, I told myself that distance was strength, that letting anyone get close was just asking for more pain when things went wrong. But watching you fight for Vesper, seeing how you refused to back down even when it cost you everything, it made me question all of that. Rhea's fingers tightened around his. I was terrified that night. She admitted, not just for Vesper, but of trusting anyone to help. Dermot had made me believe I was alone, that no one would stand up to him. You proved that wrong. Vesper shifted, pressing against both their legs, bridging the space between them. Her presence was both comfort and reminder of what they'd nearly lost and what they'd found in fighting to save her. The night of the fire, Boone said slowly. When I was trapped under that beam, I thought about all the walls I'd built, how they hadn't protected me from anything, really. They'd just kept me from living fully. I know what you mean, Rhea said. When I heard Vesper barking, saw you trapped in there, all those careful distances I'd maintained just disappeared. Nothing mattered except getting to you both. The late afternoon light had softened to evening gold. In the recovery kennels, the rescued dogs stirred, ready for their evening checks. Soon they would need to make rounds, change bandages, distribute medications. The work didn't stop just because they were having a moment of revelation. But something had shifted, as tangible as the weight of Vesper leaning against them. The walls they'd built, the distance they'd maintained, it all seemed less important than what they'd discovered in tearing them down. I'm not good at this, Boone said quietly. At letting people in. At risking care without guarantees. Neither am I, Rhea admitted. But maybe that's okay. Maybe we don't have to be good at it yet. Maybe we just have to be willing to try. Vesper's tail thumped against the floor, a steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Outside, the spring evening was settling in, so different from the winter storm that had brought them together. The clinic around them held the evidence of their shared battles, healing animals, bandaged wounds, records that had helped bring down corruption. But it also held something else now, possibility. A future that didn't require walls or distance or careful isolation. A future they could build together, scars and all. Their hands remained linked, bridging the space between their chairs. No grand declarations were needed. They had already shown each other who they were through their actions, in emergency surgeries and burning buildings, in standing up to power and protecting the vulnerable. Words were secondary to that kind of truth. Vesper rose, stretching, ready for her evening walk. The routine of care would continue, but now it was shared. The weight of healing, others and themselves, didn't have to be carried alone anymore. The Montana spring arrived with gentle determination, melting winter's grip day by day. At Boone Veterinary Clinic, the morning sun streamed through freshly cleaned windows, casting warm light on newly painted walls. The familiar scent of antiseptic mingled with the earthy smell of spring thaw drifting through open windows. Juniper Caro moved through the recovery ward with practiced efficiency, her new name badge, lead veterinary technician, catching the light. She paused at each kennel, checking charts and offering gentle words to the recovering dogs. These weren't just patients anymore. They were living testimony to what courage could accomplish. "Morning rounds are done, Dr. Boone," she called out, finding him in his office reviewing adoption applications. "The shepherd mix from Kennel 3 is ready for her forever home." Boone looked up from his desk, crow's feet crinkling at his eyes. "Thanks, Juniper. You've done amazing work with these recoveries." "We all have," she replied, adjusting her glasses with quiet pride. "It's different now, isn't it? The clinic feels lighter somehow." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The weight of secrecy and threat had lifted, replaced by something hopeful and honest. The clinic hummed with new energy. More staff, more patients, more trust from the community. A familiar truck pulled into the parking lot, and Trooper Hal Whitcomb's tall frame emerged. He entered without ceremony, carrying a folder and wearing a satisfied expression. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, setting the folder on Boone's desk. "Federal indictments just came down. The Pine Hollow case broke open 3 more operations across state lines. Your evidence did that. The surgical signatures, the tracking devices, all of it?" Boone leafed through the documents, remembering the night everything had started. Vesper in crisis, the storm raging, and a choice between safety and what was right. "It wasn't just me," he said. "We all risked something." "That's why it worked," Whitcomb replied. "Corruption thrives on isolation. You broke that pattern." He paused, then added with quiet emphasis, "This will ripple far beyond Redford, Doc." "You did good." After Whitcomb left, Boone stood at the window, watching spring birds dart between budding branches. The clinic phone rang with routine calls now, checkups and vaccinations, not threats or emergencies. Even the rescued dogs were healing, finding new homes with carefully vetted families who understood their history. The afternoon stretched golden when Rhea arrived. Vesper trotted beside her, head high, scars hidden beneath her glossy coat. She was no longer a patient but a guardian, alert and strong. The transformation in both dog and owner was remarkable. Gone was the desperate woman who had burst through his door that winter night. In her place stood someone who had reclaimed her power. "Ready for that walk?" Rhea asked, smiling. It had become their ritual, checking the clinic's fence line together at day's end, talking about everything and nothing. They started their usual route, Vesper ranging ahead to inspect familiar markers. The spring air carried promises of wildflowers and new grass. Along the fence, tiny green shoots pushed through thawed earth where snow had lately lain. "Remember when we first met?" Rhea asked, her voice thoughtful. "I was so afraid that night. Not just for Vesper, but of trusting anyone to help. And I was hiding behind procedures and protocols," Boone admitted, "trying to keep everything at arm's length. Look how well that worked out for both of us," she teased gently. They reached the back gate where, months ago, emergency vehicles had carved tracks in winter snow. Now those marks were gone, erased by spring's renewal. Vesper waited for them there, tail waving like a flag. "You know," Boone said slowly, "I've been thinking about what comes next." He reached for Rhea's hand, not with dramatic flair but with simple certainty. I'm not promising perfection, but I am promising to be here, to face whatever comes next together. Ria's fingers interlaced with his, warm and real. I like that better than perfection anyway, she said. Perfect is suspicious. This feels true. Vesper barked once, as if agreeing, then pushed through the gate into the meadow beyond. She paused, looking back at them expectantly. The future stretched before them, not as a fairy tale ending, but as something better, a path they had chosen, a trust they had built from broken pieces. They stepped forward together, following Vesper into the lengthening evening light. The storm that had brought them together had long since passed, but its lessons remained. Courage in the face of power, trust rebuilt after betrayal, and the choice to fight for what matters most. These weren't just memories now, but foundations for whatever came next. Spring breeze carried the scent of thawing earth and new growth. Behind them, the clinic stood solid and bright, a sanctuary made stronger by the battles it had weathered. Ahead, Vesper bounded through new grass, her movement full of joy and strength. And between them, their linked hands spoke of a future that felt earned, not given, a beginning built on truth, tested by fire, and chosen with clear eyes and full hearts. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.